Greetings friends, you are on the Military Reports channel, and today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on the 6th of April 2024 year. A large number of events have taken place today. The advance of the armed forces of the Russian Federation is being noted on almost every section of the front line, and in some areas. This progress is very interesting. Let's start with you first from the Kharkiv direction, from where, let's say, interesting shots come from. To be more precise, not from Kharkiv, but let's say from the area of the settlement of Malaya Danilovka. Yes, that is, from the area aka the Kharkiv Ring Road. If we get closer, we will see a lot of geolocation data. And here is the first geolocation, which was published today by Russian sources. In these frames, we can observe with you how the armed forces of Ukraine begin to assemble. Concentrate multiple launch rocket systems at one point. At first, sources reported that these were Vampire multiple launch rocket systems, but later, when during the analysis of primary data, during the analysis of, say, these systems that had already been destroyed there, it was possible to identify at least one Grad system. While it is difficult to say at all what the second one was, a Vampire or a Hail, but in general, we see that sources report that it was from these positions that the armed forces of Ukraine planned to deliver another bloody blow to Belgorod. And these broken systems are obtained. Here is what is left of the terrain, a large funnel as a whole, on the road, and from here it was planned to strike. Let's assume these same shots only at night, as this blow as a whole occurred. We see a secondary detonation, and if we calculate the distance from this direction, from this point to the settlement of Belgorod, then approximately the APU have the ability to strike at approximately a distance of 70 kilometers or more. In other words, Belgorod will take with you the central part of 66 kilometers or more, yes, well, quite significantly. And in general, now we understand with you why the Russian army in the previous days, the previous weeks, began to strike. Strikes at Kharkiv with the use of, let's say, aerial bombs, because the APU lost the opportunity, as far as I understand, to strike somewhere from the area of Liptsov, or in the area of the Dergachi, or Cossack camps or other settlements. Since everything is tracked and everything is instantly destroyed, and the only opportunity now that the APU has left is to beat from Kharkiv itself, from under the cover of urban development, these urban jungles. But even this no longer helps. If we talk about Kharkiv itself, the situation here becomes critical. Electricity, restoration, electricity could not be restored here. A large number of people leave the settlement every day, and blows are carried out in huge numbers with the use of geraniums every day. And for example, the other day Ermak, I hope you know who this person is, gave an interview to a politician, and he talked a lot. Perhaps you can recognize him there by his face. And according to his information, according to the information he provided to the Politics magazine, Kharkiv is most likely the most likely target of the summer offensive of the Russian Federation. And this is primarily evidenced by the huge number of strikes, missile strikes, strikes of the disembodied, power outages, and so on. But in general, it is already the 6th of April. There is very little left before the start of the summer campaign. The only question is whether this offensive on Kharkiv will begin after the Battle of Chaz Yar or Novi Mikhailovka, Ugledar, or before, or at the same time. Well, then we will transfer you to the line of combat contact. We will start with you from the Kopensky direction. As you can see, there are no geolocations. The locality itself is generally empty. And here, of course, it is very interesting, because it has been repeatedly stated here that the Russian army plans to conduct an offensive on the most populated area, or encirclement there. There is the restoration of control and other points. However, as a result, we see that during the battles for Sinkovka, the Russian command managed to force the APU to think that the main gift would be held here, and this led to the fact that the APU were forced to concentrate a large number of reserves here, a large army which is now essentially inactive. It is not used in battles, and while the Russian army continues to advance in other sectors of the front. Then we move with you to the Seversk direction, from where a large amount of interesting geolocation information comes. And the most important information that interests us is, of course, the situation that is developing in the Belagorskovka area. The armed forces of the Russian Federation continue to conduct assault operations in order to cover and surround the chalk dump. With approximately this route, individual cartographers additionally correct the maps, indicating that additional square kilometers or square meters were established by the control of the Russian army somewhere. Well, that is, there is a half-grab. And today, including some Russian telegram channels, they report that the armed forces of Ukraine have lost positions, were knocked out of position west of the chalk quarry. Of course, this information is not enough to correct the map yet. We just say it, we mean it, and keep it in mind, and understand that there is progress. There is an attempt to semi-capture the chalk quarry from both the east and the south and southwest. That is, judging by the last post. After all, the Russian army really managed to advance missile defense. Let's say, to push through the positions of the Apu, somewhere in the area of the forest southeast, southwest of the landfill, southwest of the Belomyatval, and perhaps approximately this area. This territory is already also under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. In any case, the action in the Belagorsky direction is developing quite dynamically. And of course, Belogorsk is the #1 goal, without compromise, without any alternative options. The insurance will be taken by the Russian army, from what we have been seeing with you, for the last days, a day. The only question is what price the Russian team, the Russian army, will have to pay for this particular battle. But it will be, and it will end. And at the same time, we receive very interesting shots, and they come from the Serebryanka district. That is, if we talk about the 22nd year, then in the 22nd year, this Serebryanka was in the zone of active hostilities. After the completion of the Lysychansk-Severodonetsk operation, and then the Russian army approached Grigorovka, and even moved further west to Serebryanka. Serebryanka was constantly subjected to artillery shelling, but after the Kharkiv offensive, Serebryanka was forgotten. And here is April 2024 year, and again we have Serebryanka in the frames, artillery shelling. In general, this suggests that the focus is still moving further west, and there are attempts to restore, let's say, artillery control over the main supply routes that lead reinforcements, provisions, and Belogorov personnel. We see where the strikes were carried out, mainly along the roads. The counter-battery struggle continues in the Seversky direction. In separate frames published over the past day, it is possible to note the destruction of individual, let's say, self-propelled artillery installations of the armed forces of Ukraine, with the use of Lancet barrage supplies. In other words, such a story is happening in our Belogorsky direction. Then we move with you to the chapel, where a huge number of geolocations come from. Let me remind you that yesterday we discussed the Russian operation with the landing of troops in the forest. And in the eastern part of the Yaroklock, we tried to break down all the videos approximately in detail, in pieces, in order to understand where the offensive is going, and what will happen next. And of course, everyone was essentially divided into two camps. Some claim that there will be an attack on the Clock Yar from the eastern part, others that it is still from the north, in the eastern part, through the railway over the bridge. And after that video, which we discussed with you, with the two landing groups that landed, more news came in overnight, more information during the day, and some kind of picture of what is really happening here has already appeared. And as of this morning, individual cartographers, individual sources, report establishing control over at least this piece of forest, establishing control over the northern part of the forest, that is north of the railway, and over the central part of the forest too, along the railway, that is, if we summarize all the news from various independent sources that came in this morning, let's just say that over the past few days, during offensive operations, the Russian army has managed to at least establish control over this area. While we are not going to adjust the map, we are still based on geolocations and actual, and let's say visual control. But in general, it is worth noting, of course, this promotion, as it is confirmed by fairly reliable sources. That is, this situation, which has already been today, for this morning. Including this morning, the first shots of the flights of the AF drones of Baba Yaga were published, most likely Baba Yaga. Already Baba Hedgehogs are flying, let's say, over the northeastern part of the channel of the Yara Clock Quarter. And in these frames, we see the flight of Baba Yaga of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the very northeastern part, and attempts to discounts of the first grenades, the first explosives in this part, that is, where the video took place here. In other words, we see with you that there is already an opportunity to fly in, that is, which suggests that most likely the forest. This is really already this part in the gray zone, or already under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Also in the morning, footage was published, including strikes and stripping, leveling, let's say, with the ground. Again in the northeastern part. Here we have seen for ourselves. Perhaps it was a Ukrainian cassette, since most likely according to the video, there were already positions or the advancing orders of the Russian army. And after that, the footage of the northeastern clock of the Yar is published from the garage area. And a little later, Russian cassettes begin to arrive, including, let's say, also in the northeastern part. And just before I started recording this video, information arrived that one of the airborne assault group was able to gain a foothold in the Canal micro-district on the north side of the city. Very heavy artillery and anti-tank artillery fire from the 93rd Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. That is, if we sum up and add this latest news, the latest update, and regarding the consolidation, there is an extremely high probability that the armed forces of the Russian Federation have already entered the Yar Channel from this side, and it is here that the consolidation is being carried out, an additional reinforcement throw. In the forest, of course, they will butt heads for this building, for a small dacha, but it is not possible to do this for long here in sight. Of course, the main focus on the emphasis on defense will lie precisely in the central part of the eastern clock of the Yar. That is, here they will fight. It will be difficult to fight back here, due to the fact that there is a very large distance between small wooden houses, garages. Here, closer to the garages, more or less serious resistance may begin. In particular, shots of strikes and alignment of the Yar clock, more precisely Bogdanovka, are being published. More and more discounts, sweeps, and including some pro-Russian cartographers, indicate that part of Bogdanovka has come under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. That is, according to some pro-Russian cartographers, approximately this territory is also under the control of the Russian army. But again, let's put it this way, perhaps there is such a situation on Earth, but there is too little evidence, and some things for us to even color it red. I suppose it makes sense to keep it in the gray zone for a while until we get more reliable evidence. Further along the southern flank, in the direction of the Yar clock, it is also noted, an advance is also noted. According to separate sources from Ivanovsky, assault actions are being conducted by the Golubkovsky Vtory, and among other things, separate maps are being published showing additional control of the Russian army, and including, if you and I, well, let's just say, sum up everything that we have done overnight. Here is approximately this apartment in the present picture. At the moment is viewed in the direction of a clear east of the Yar, and southeast. In other words, we see with you that, well, that's it. This is already an active phase of the offensive. There will not be such a situation here that they were advancing, stopped, and then began to beat in another direction. That's it. The Russian army plans to leave before the channel. It is difficult to say about the call to the Yar itself, and it is possible that there will not be a call yet. But the fact that the Russian army will reach the Seversky-Donetsk-Donbass Canal is 100%. And not only, in one of the hours of Yar, there will most likely be a call to the canal, starting from Grigorovka, Kalinovka. The hours of Yar, that is the canal, the forest quarter west of Ivanovsky, then Kleshivka, and this lower southern bridgehead. Here, what is worth noting in the southern direction is the intensification of hostilities along the Kurdyumovka-Zelenopolia-Zaryanovka line. There are very interesting geolocations here. If we increase the number of updates with you from the 1st of April, then the other day we received information about the intensification of hostilities along the major Kazaryanovka Canal. And already today a huge number of geolocations are being published, or rather I would say so. Sweeps, attempts to clean up fortified areas, the AFU strongholds on the Ukrainian side of the canal, with the use of a huge number of drones. Here on these frames, we see attempts of drone flights, strikes, stripping, several waves of strikes. Here is the channel, including again the supports, stripping, strikes, and in large numbers. In other words, this is not yet a ground operation, but this number of spent EPI buckets indicates that there are some tasks. There are some goals in the direction. In other words, let's go back to geolocations again. There was a sweep of a strong point west of the settlement of Kurdyumovka here. That is, in order to cross the channel and attempt to establish control, strikes were inflicted on this strong point. Here is a big cop that goes further into the forest belt, which smoothly goes further into the settlement. There is a long friendship and so on. And artillery strikes were carried out on this part of the canal between the same Kurdyumovka-Zaryanovka, including New York, and Novgorod, and Druzhba-Toretsk and Dzerzhinsky. In other words, blows are being struck, and a sweep is being carried out. The Russian army and Russian artillery are working quite closely, and based on all this, it can really be concluded that there is such an activation here for a reason, especially since in the near future, a further offensive is possible, both on the end of Dzerzhinsk and on Konstantinev as a Yarok clock, of course. The best flank breakthrough is observed and considered the offensive of Zelenopol-Biryanovka-Delivka, Bilogora, Forerunner, and Alexandra Shultin. In other words, such an operation is possible in the near future. Let's say it will begin in this direction. Then, we are moving with you to the Avdiivka direction, from where a large amount of geolocation also comes. Today, Ukrainian sources published footage of FB hitting buckets on an abandoned Russian B. That is, let's say, the Beha arrived, the troops landed, took up positions, the Beha was abandoned, and a huge number of disembodied people immediately worked on it. The Beha was set on fire. These shots took place here. That is, we have some reason to understand with you that most likely the entire western, eastern, central part of Berdik is under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, shares the positions of the armed forces with the Russian Federation, the Durnai River, the Gusyatnik Stakes, and in general, the front line is now going along the river. No information has yet been received about the positions of the Russian armed forces on this side, let's say, along Kazbarov Street. Maybe there's something at the intersection here. But in any case, even if you look at the configuration, there are a small number of houses, a small number, very small residential buildings, and it is unlikely that they will be able to keep this direction for a long time. Then, we are moving with you to Uman. A further offensive of the Russian army is developing here. The picture is becoming more and more dangerous for the APU. The Russian leadership of the command ambiguously set the task to reach the Charles Reservoir before the completion of the Avdiivka operation stage. For these purposes, they throw a huge number of Russian army stormtroopers, assaults, and so it is carried out simply, in an endless stream. In the forest, they publish footage of fields dotted with destroyed, abandoned broken equipment. Not only the Russian army. Here there is a complete vinaigrette, and Ukrainian equipment is broken, Russian. In general, the fights don't stop for a second. Of the important things to pay attention to is the destruction of the bridge over the Durnai River in the Uman district. That is, in fact, the Russian army has finally cut the supply and the given direction into two sections. Here's the punch. As a result of the impact, the bridge was completely destroyed. And this bridge, once again, is located in the Umansky district. And from that moment on, in fact, Yasnobrodovka, the settlement of Yasnobrodovka, turned out to be in some even small environment, since there is pressure on Netaylovo. Well, that is, in general, the site was cut. That's it. Now the APU will say heavy equipment here, from the Uman northern part, to transfer to, say, some street from the street Sunny Street to Bachelin Street, is no longer able. Perhaps the personnel will be able to cross over some bridges there, through this bad rail, swim across it there, crawl over. Then the equipment will no longer cross. Now their equipment will only be able to go from the Nantelova-Karlovka area. But it is also not very convenient, and in general, the entire configuration has completely changed. That is, we should also expect in the near future further advance of the Russian army in the direction of Kesnobrodovka, possibly already physical cutting, since Semensky is no longer well worth being afraid of, and in general, even Zalmanskoye can be attacked, since nothing can stop the Russian offensive. There are no reserves that can be transferred from here to here. Perhaps there will still be attempts from the other shore to somehow knock down, stop. But Ukrainians will not be able to do anything from Batuli Street anymore. They will come here, and in the near future. At the same time, the Russian command continues to conduct an effective counter-battery struggle, destroying several pieces of equipment every day in the area of the same Mezov, Amansky to the west. And in these frames, another artillery installation of the armed forces of Ukraine was destroyed on target as a result of a point hit. With the use of Krasnopol, a little to the south, another Savashka was driving to the position to start shooting back, but she was also destroyed with the use of a Russian Lancet. For understanding, of course, even from April, it is worth raising the number of updates. Here's where the extra footage appears. But of course, we are seeing the greatest counter-battery struggle in the area of Karlovka. Only in recent years, since the beginning of April, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 destroyed pieces of artillery equipment of the armed forces of Ukraine have been deployed in the area of the Charles Reservoir. And here, the situation also continues to develop as inconveniently as possible for the UPU. The other day, we discussed with you, and the Ministry of Defense reported, and the establishment of full control over the settlement of Vodiaya, that is, the last houses along the embankment of the street, were taken, and today shots are already being published from the side in the USO. A large series of FP strikes with buckets of the 59th Motorized Brigade of the IFU. But this 59 is like this. Let's say the snake is twisted like this, and if we watch the footage with you, here is their very symbol here. On these frames there are a huge number of drone strikes on positions on the Russian army stormtroopers along Lenin Street, in the postal line that is here. Well, we will not watch the footage, because this is a scene of violence. We missed them, but in general, these shots confirm that most of the Pervomaiski is already behind the Russian army. Perhaps Russian troops are already cleaning up, let's say, Pervomaiski, and it already goes to the highway, which then goes to Netelev. That is, May Day. The days are numbered, and very soon, the whole story will end here. And in general, the battle for the western, say, Avdiivka bridgehead, is coming to its logical conclusion, and to the exit of the Charles Reservoir, of course. Then, we are moving with you to the Maryinsky direction. Counter-battery duels, counter-artillery duels, artillery fighting are conducted here. And again a large number of destroyed artillery installations of the armed forces of Ukraine are noted. With an increase in updates from the 1st of April, we simply see a catastrophically large consumption of artillery guns from the VSO. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, at least 5 installations have been destroyed in recent years, only for the month of April. This is what is jellicated. According to the summary of the Ministry of Defense, this indicator has long been digested for at least a few dozen since the beginning of the week. And what is worth noting here again is the destruction of artillery installations. Here, a self-propelled artillery installation was identified and destroyed by a blow from Krasnopol, a little to the south. A 2-with-1 self-propelled gun was discovered, including with the use of a counter-battery artillery strike. It was destroyed. But despite all these successes, it is possible that they are still trying to counterattack, both in the victory area and also in the USU. They are trying to counterattack in the direction of the same Novomikhailovka. What is going on with us in Novomikhailovka? The situation is also developing as negatively as possible for the armed forces of Ukraine. 3 geolocations with directions were published today. The first geolocation is the central part of the Dachas, and we will not watch this video until the end. There are literally a couple of frames, but the bottom line is that the armed forces of Ukraine are already striking at the central Dachas. In other words, there is probably much more in the central part. We have already managed to wedge in and go much deeper, but we are adjusting precisely according to geolocation. That is, at least half of the Garden Association Mashinastroidal is under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and more shots were published by 72-79. Again, from the central part of Novomikhailivka, hit tanks, hit vehicles. Attempts to finish off the equipment of the armed forces of the Russian Federation with the use of epi buckets and discounts. Here is the last extreme geolocation was recorded at the intersection of Sobornaya Street and Mira Street, that is here. And again, we see, if you remember the previous configuration of the Russian position much further to the east. That is, if we estimate approximately how long the front is now held by the Ukrainian troops, then we will say to the outskirts. From one outskirts to the other 1.5 kilometers, that is, it's actually not much. And let's say from the southern part, along the dry Yali Reservoir, well, 620 meters, yes, that is, the bridgehead remained minimal, and there is an extremely high probability that perhaps by the time you watch this video and Novomikhailivka, the story of Novomikhailivka will end. And due to the fact that the battle for Novomikhailivka is really coming to its logical conclusion, there will be no other end here. It's a week, maybe another maximum, well, maybe 2, you know, it's a wind correction, yes, and this battle will end. But as far as I understand the Russian leadership, the military could have completed the battle for Novomikhailivka for a long time. At the moment, we are, let's say, pulling up the Ugledar flank. Another day, another huge number of geolocations received from this direction, destroyed positions. In the arrivals of FABs on fortifications north of Nikolsky, which have repeatedly tried to storm, let's say, in the past. The previous stages of a special military operation. Here is another attempt to sweep, strikes from the FABs, arrivals including at mines near the water. Near the water mine, the work is carried out by drones through the means of communication, on the REBs, on the Starlinks. That is, communication is jammed, eyes, ears, and all control are destroyed. In order to facilitate the advance of Russian troops as much as possible later on, both the direction of the lead and the direction of the coal mine. Near the Ugledar itself, another point was destroyed either by machine gun or mortar crew. A position in front of a large caliber machine gun. Yes, this position, which is located at the very, it turns out looks at the Pavlovka itself, was destroyed. That is, the cleanup is gradually underway. And that is why, most likely, including along Novomikhailivka, they are slowing down a little, because they want to possibly. It is possible to conduct an offensive simultaneously in 3 directions at once, namely, to try to storm Nikolskoye. It turns out forest belts. The first attack, it will probably be the 3rd or 4th attempt to attack here, first with a special military, and then with a sweet water along the highway, and of course, the final sweep of Novomikhailivka further to Konstantinovka. That is, most likely they want to hit with 3 blows, 3 wedges. It is unlikely that they will attack from the direction of Pavlovka. Well, perhaps they will try to force Kashligok and enter the farms in such a way as to also create an additional pressure point. But that's exactly what they want to do all at the same time, so that the APU does not have the opportunity to quickly transfer reserves. Somewhere the pillbox will crack, somewhere it will tear, and somewhere there will be a breakthrough. And of course, that can lead to disastrous consequences in general for the direction for the Viso. There is no news on the South Donetsk direction. Again, sweeps are being carried out productively. The bombing may be holding this direction as a backup, let's say. In case of such a successful continuation of these strikes, it may try to attack somewhere until it is noticed in the active phase on the ground. Work on as much as possible, no news, perhaps in the near future, something will resume there. Of interesting things, it is also worth noting that tonight is Russian. The armed forces of the Russian Federation launched a massive missile strike on Ukraine with the use of missiles and, of course, with the use of drones. It is worth paying attention to the flight map. That's how Russian missiles and Russian drones flew. Note that the red line is a trajectory. It turns out Russian missiles. It turns out that they flew in, let's say, from the east, then south, to the west, then to the north, and to Kiev, let's say, from the opposite side. Geraniums flew from all directions, and there is one line, the blue line. This blue line is the launch of the Caliber today. That is, a large amount of caliber has already been accumulated. 101 have been spent for, let's say, the last few months, and therefore it will be possible to use less of them now. It all depends on the production capacity. I don't have the information, but the first caliber flew. Perhaps it was a sighting, and in the near future, we should expect more and more calibers that will fly, and which will now replace the Osta of the first, while they will resume their number in warehouses, then to change the picture back. But in any case, if the entry of calibers is already beginning to go, then we really should expect the beginning of some kind of offensive from the Russian army, most likely. And just as Yermak and Zelensky are burning, they are afraid for Kharkiv. Perhaps their fears are justified.